All right, well, I'm seeing 6:02, so I think we should probably get things started. I'm Greg Catamatori. I'm the planning director with the city of Gloucester, and this is the kickoff meeting for the harbor planning process. And I just kind of stress this is the very beginning of the process. The city just received the notice to proceed from the Office of Coastal Zone Management last week. There's been some background work that's been done over the course of the summer leading up to this meeting, but this is really the beginning of the process. And we're so pleased that we had so many people respond to this first meeting. And I just wanted to start off by giving the mayor just a moment to say a few words, and then I'll go over kind of the overview of how we're going to conduct the evening. We have a lot to get through in a couple of hours, and I'm sure it's just the beginning of a conversation that's going to, again, go on for quite some time over the course of the next year. So, Mayor, if you want to say a few words.
There's no such thing, just a few words, Greg, you should know that. But first of all, everyone, thank you so much. This is really an important part of our whole history and our future, the harbor plan. It's our industry, it's our waterfront, which goes along the coast, and the fact is it's our heritage. And I'm so glad to see so many different diverse people. We have artists, we have factory workers, we have store owners, we have, the chamber, advocates. It's just great. And remember, this is just the first, let's say, session. There's supposed to be some more. The consultants are on here, and I'm going to always continue to join. I may not be your mayor, but doesn't mean I'm not your advocate for the industry. I'll be tapping along with the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives, and we're going forward. We are all here to make sure that we have a working waterfront, the blue economy that they did. Thank you, Jill. Said, the fishing industry is alive. It's diverse, and we want to make sure that people understand what that means. Just because you don't see 700 vessels doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does exist. Look at the numbers, look at the income, look at that. And don't forget, we have tons of lobstermen. And just because you don't see the boats doesn't mean it's not there. So we also have transit. And so we have a great working waterfront, and we're going to continue that. So everyone, I'm going to listen. And like I said, I may have a different title, but I'm always going to be back strong and full force. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm just going to go through a little formality. We did also post this as a Harbor Plan Committee meeting because we do have a full quorum of the committee. So I'll just start with the formalities that we've been using during the last many months. So this is the Harbor Plan kickoff meeting, November 15th. Again, it's just after 6 o'clock. Pursuant to Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the Harbor Plan Committee during this and future remote meetings will be by roll call vote. If there's a public comment period, and this will be a little bit different this evening because we are going to have breakout groups where you'll be able to speak. If the phone is kind of irrelevant because you had to pre-register, but if you were on a phone, you could press *9 to request to speak. And if you're watching on a computer or a device, there's a raise hand button that you can press to request to speak. This meeting will be recorded and made available on the city's website in accordance with the state open meeting law. And I just want to emphasize really kind of a code of conduct. We have a lot of people that want to participate. We want everybody to be heard. So we're going to kind of reiterate kind of ground rules several times throughout the meeting because we have a lot of people that would like to voice some opinions about things and also learn about the process. So we will hope that people will be respectful and raise their hand when they want to be recognized and not speak until they have been recognized. And additionally, we'll get to a point where we'll really kind of, until people have kind of made their comment and then exhausted their comment, we'll go back to others that might want to speak again. So let me, I'm just also going to do a quick roll call of the committee members so that people can recognize who they are. So I'll call your name and just say aye. Chairman Rick Noonan.
Aye.
Member Tom Balfe.
Aye.
Member Tessa Brown.
Aye.
Member John McCarthy.
Aye.
Member Katie Call.
Aye.
Member Al Cotone. Not sure if he's present yet. And the other two members are Vito Gigoloni and Tony Gross, who will not be able to make it this evening. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And I just wanted to again point out that this is the very beginning of the harbor planning process. You know, we have formed a committee. We've selected a consultant team led by Util, and have worked over the summer on gathering a lot of background information and data. You can view some of those presentations or all those presentations on the Harbor Plan website, which is harborplan.gloucester-ma.gov. And I just want to stress also that this will not be the first opportunity for you to provide feedback and comment. We will have the breakout groups later this evening with a couple of exercises that you can participate in. And there are ongoing ways of participating in the process through the website. If you want to directly contact us, you can do that as well. But again, there'll be 5 opportunities, including this evening. Hopefully not in the same format. At some point, I hope we're back in rooms where we can sit around tables and discuss these important issues. And so at this point, I'll pass it off to the Util team, who will kind of lead us. Whoop, one more comment.
Al Catone has joined us by phone, so his hand is up and the mayor's hand is up. Greg.
Okay. So I'll just, if I can unmute Al. Actually, I'm not sure if I see his number.
It's the 508 number.
Yep. Al, is that you?
I'm here.
Okay.
That's me. Yep.
Okay, great. So we have most of the committee members are here. Thank you.
And
So I
then
was
the
gonna
mayor
pass-
has her hand up.
Okay.
Okay,
Oh, you're muted, Mayor.
when I was mayor, I still am, but you asked me who would we like on the committee, and because we thought it could be a conflict, we didn't put the fishermen's wives. I am no longer going to be mayor after January, and we would like a representation of the fishermen's wives on this committee. We also have Tony Gross, who was representing with the waterways, so we don't know if he's going to continue as ex officio for the city council, and John McCarthy, who is city council, who's no longer going to be a city council. They're going to remain. So that was some of people's concerns. My concern is that the fishermen's wives, who's the biggest advocate, who should be on here, didn't want to have anyone saying it was a conflict because where I was mayor. Well, after January, there is no conflict. We'd like to have a seat on the board.
Thank you for that comment. And at this point, I will turn it over to Matt Littell from Util.
I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen before I hand it over to Matthew.
Yep,
Thank
all set.
you.
We can see it.
Great.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mayor. We've had a nice welcome from the city. Our agenda includes an introduction of our team and a series of slides that will, we hope will explain why we're doing this planning process and what the nature of a municipal harbor plan really is. That will be followed by breakout groups, as Greg described, where we will look at maps together, try to better understand what your interests are, where you see opportunities, where you see challenges, and hopefully coming up to some sort of synthesis of some of those ideas in a key priorities discussion. We will then sort of report back. I think big picture, the goal of this meeting is, this is really the first time that we've had the general public all in one sort of virtual place to understand what your broad interests and concerns are. As Greg mentioned, our team has been doing a lot of homework in advance of this moment, some of the economic analysis, some of the infrastructural analysis. And while we are increasingly well informed about some of those technical details and some of the data, we haven't yet really heard from the general public. And so that's really the kind of primary mission of this, this meeting tonight. Our team consists of an incredibly talented group and well-informed group of planners and economic advisors. I'm joined by Teskina Tureen, our project manager, and Zoe Mueller from Util, who will be also guiding some of the breakout groups. Tetra Tech and Fort Point Associates are here. represented by Jason Hellendrum, who is leading some of our work on the infrastructural piece, and Jamie Fay, who is the true municipal harbor plan and regulatory planning sort of expert in the room. Unfortunately, because of the shift in the time, Kevin Hively of Ninegret Partners, who's our kind of economic analysis advisor, is not able to attend, but he's been very busy looking at a lot of data, and we'll be reporting back at a later group. We also have Nasser Brahim from the Woods Hole Group, an expert on resilience and sea level rise, as well as Dave Andrews from Brown, Richardson and Rowe, who's our landscape architect advising on the project. Next slide. Okay, so what is a municipal harbor plan update? A municipal harbor plan is really a state-approved document that establishes community goals, standards, and policies guiding public and private land use along harbors. The Chapter 91, which I will describe in a little bit more detail later, is state-level legislation that is intended to promote public use and preserve water-dependent uses along the water. A municipal harbor plan allows for those Chapter 91 standards to be tailored more specifically to a particular community or a waterfront, such as Gloucester. A key component is it relies on input from the public and an advisory committee, which is our harbor planning committee. That's why these meetings are so important. It builds on previous harbor plans. This is not the first one. So we are looking at what's happened since the last one and what sorts of changes needs to be made, and how we actually look towards the future and sort of bake in some of those long-term goals into the plan. It is administered at the state level by the Office of Coastal Zone Management, otherwise known as CZM. Once a plan is in place, though, the licensing and the other sorts of interpretations are really sort of regulated by Department of Environmental Protection. And finally, any changes we propose really must be consistent with the underlying Massachusetts tidelands policy. Next slide. Our planning area is shown in this map. What you're seeing are a couple of shades here. The darker areas of purple and the darker areas of green represent those portions of our study area that are technically within Chapter 91 jurisdiction. And you'll see lighter green areas and lighter purple areas, which are technically outside of Chapter 91 jurisdiction, but are part of our planning scope. So what you're seeing is along the downtown edge, we've included up to Main Street and some of the abutting parcels. We've also included in East Gloucester, also over to East Main Street. The intention is to, while the ultimate plan will have most of its teeth in those areas that are within jurisdiction, the idea is to take a more holistic view of the marine economy, including some of the upland areas, and to think more holistically about some of the measures that we're contemplating to think about the entire marine-related economy. And so that's why you're seeing that sort of reach. Next slide, please. So what is Chapter 91? Chapter 91 really goes back to a very long time. It was originally ordinances in the colonial times to permit certain degrees of public access to flowed tidelands for the purposes of fishing, fouling, or navigation or other things. Most recently, it was enshrined in much more detail in the Massachusetts Public Waterfront Act in 1983 to regulate both filled and flowed tidelands. So a filled tideland is an area that was maybe previously a flowed tideland or one that was underwater, but has since been filled. So for instance, the state fish pier falls under that sort of jurisdiction. And the goal really very generally is preserving and protecting pedestrian access to the water, establishing priorities for water dependent uses, things that need access to the water, and also guaranteeing that private uses in these areas always serve a proper public purpose. Next slide. What is a designated port area? A designated port area is really a kind of a subset of the Chapter 91 jurisdiction area. And they are areas that are set aside to preserve and protect water-dependent industrial uses. There are 10 designated port areas in the Commonwealth. Obviously, Gloucester is one of them. And these boundaries are reviewed periodically. Gloucester had a portion of its DPA boundary removed in around 2014. And these are areas that are really reserved to protect access to the water for various water-dependent industrial uses. And that includes commercial fishing, shipping, vessel-related commercial activity, for instance, ship repair, manufacturing, processing, production, basically any activity that requires marine transportation or large volumes of water. Uses such as residential uses or recreational marinas, for instance, these are the type of units that are typically not allowed in a designated port area. Next slide. Like a municipal harbor plan, a DPA master plan is part of this process. Really, our municipal harbor plan is really kind of two plans in a way that are bundled into a sort of coherent and aligned whole that will include the municipal harbor plan plus a DPA master plan. And the DPA master plan really works the same way that a municipal harbor plan does, which is it allows a community or municipality to adjust some of the regulations, to kind of tailor it to its specific needs, while ensuring that the real fundamental DPA interests are preserved for that particular place. Next slide. There are in Chapter 91 standards for non-water dependent uses, which in some cases are permissible. And they guide such things as the height of buildings. You can see here a certain amount of stepping back from the water is required. They identify something called a water dependent use zone, which is usually about a quarter of the depth of the parcel and sometimes up to 100 feet, an area reserved specifically for water dependent uses. They require a certain amount of open space. Again, this is to permit a certain amount of porosity and open space for public access around the water. Typically, a harbor walk is required. This is the sort of primary pathway that the public is allowed to use to gain access to the water. And when you are not a water dependent use, there are certain, within 100 feet of the water, certain first floor use restrictions, something we call facilities of public accommodation, where a certain portion of the building may be required to contain a use that is not private, but is more publicly accessible, such as retail, for instance. Next slide. So why are we amending the current Gloucester plan now? Let's go back a little bit to the history. The first Gloucester Harbor Plan was approved in 1999. There was an update in 2009, and most recently, there was a full renewal in August of 2014. The goals of that plan were to strengthen the maritime industries in Gloucester, to update the plan and its provisions to reflect a revised DPA boundary. So as I mentioned, you can see on the right-hand side of this map, there was a piece of the inner harbor on the East Gloucester side that was sort of removed from the DPA. And then really to help build a framework specific to the waterfront that would adapt to some of the changing uses, technologies, and the changes within the fishing industry. Next slide. At a very high level, there were a few significant outcomes to that plan. Again, the boundary review was a significant one. Again, freeing up a portion of the East Gloucester section of the harbor for different types of uses. The allocation of supporting uses were redistributed. These are uses within a DPA that may not be marine industrial or water dependent industrial uses, but are allowed to exist so long as they support the marine uses, the industrial uses to some degree. This most recent plan allowed a little bit of additional flexibility about the concentrations of those things and where they were located. There were some flexibilities about the variable dimensions for that water dependent use zone that I described. And around the time of this plan, marine related research was determined to be an allowable use in a DPA. This was a very significant piece that came out of the last plan that has allowed the Gloucester Marine Genomics Institute to be located where it is, right in the middle of the DPA. Next slide. The new Municipal Harbor Plan and DPA Master Plan will, at the outset, really be a strategic document that supports the economic base and expands economic development opportunities, both marine dependent and supporting uses of harbor properties. There is a fundamental and strong underlying economic analysis component to this plan, which we'll get into in a little bit later, but it's really that the economic strategy has to take into account the city's overall economic position relative to other ports to effectively position and revitalize its maritime assets. And another significant piece is that we do not anticipate a boundary review of the DPA as part of this update. Next slide. So the goals of this Municipal Harbor Plan are similar to the last one, but really a little bit updated. We certainly, first and foremost, want to strengthen and to support the traditional industries that have occupied the port. We want to align the plan with the city's goal of diversifying and investing in its maritime economy. The GMGI is a good example of what diversification of that economy might look like. We want to allow this plan to incorporate measures that might be undertaken to adapt to rising sea levels and increasing flooding that occurs in and around the harbor. And finally, on a more practical level, we really want to we need to renew the 2014 Gloucester Plan. There is an expiration date associated with that. And so we are well on track to sort of making sure that we're keeping current with that so that we have an additional 10 years. Next slide.
Thank you, Matthew. So I will quickly just give an overview of the harbor planning timeline and process. So this process is anticipated to take from a sort of a 1.5 to 2 years, which appears lengthy, but also a realistic one. It's important to note that a bulk of the sort of planning and framing base analysis is actually in the first 9 to 10 months. And what really adds to the time is a separate set of regulatory steps, including review and comment periods. At the bottom of this timeline, you can see some black circles, and these are indicating the large public meetings that we'll be holding for every milestone of the project. So right now we're having our kickoff meeting, which is supposed to be, some couple of weeks ago, but had to be postponed. So we're going to have, this is just a project kickoff. This is really an opportunity for us to introduce the harbor planning process and also an opportunity to hear from you all with initial thoughts of opportunities for the harbor. We'll have at least an additional 3 other meetings at this scale. And as Greg mentioned that, even these meetings will be spaced apart 3 to 4 months, but there'll be plenty of other opportunities in between to collect feedback and give input. And this can be via the website, which I'll get into a little, and also via sort of stakeholder and other outreach methods. So we're our next meeting, as Matthew alluded to, will be looking at some of the economic analysis that we've been working on, as well as an economic strategy. this is as Matthew mentioned, this will be a major part of the plan. So look out for that in the next couple of months. So this slide is giving an idea of the sort of where the larger planning meetings fall with other stakeholder outreach. So during this first phase of this process, we've already connected to and held stakeholder meetings with representatives of the harbor. And if we haven't reached out to you, rest assured that we will be reaching out soon throughout the process. And in addition to these, as I mentioned, the website is really one of the primary tools that we'll be using to gathering feedback. So if you have a comment or something you really have to say, instead of letting it get lost in emails or through other people, the website is the best tool for us to really have everything in one place. If you're able to just go into the website and you will not only be able to see past meetings, recordings, learn more about the plan and have updates, but you'll also be able to directly submit comments to us. So I'll hand it over to Zoe from the team now to just give us a brief overview of the existing base analysis that we've been doing, as well as an overview of the approach that we're taking for the plan.
Great, thanks, Christina. So this is really a very brief sampler of some of the work that's been done so far. There's a much more in-depth set of slides that's available online, like Christina mentioned, on the website. But just to give you a sense of some of the things we've been looking at, one of the things that's come up in all sorts of different settings from sort of every different stakeholder on the harbor is that the infrastructure, at the harbor, at the waterfront, sort of a lot of it needs attention, needs some sort of investment, needs upgrading, needs modernization. And so we took a sort of a deep dive of starting to look at some of that infrastructure, both in terms of landside infrastructure and in terms of what's the infrastructure that's actually at the water's edge. So in terms of landside infrastructure, we found that the utility system is in really good shape. This is something that's sort of progress that has been made since the last plan. There's a lot of great upgrades that have been implemented. And they're sort of now at the sort of steady state of routine maintenance. There's also, in terms of electric power, that's owned and operated by National Grid. We understand that reliability has been a concern, and so there's some upgrades ongoing, investments planned by National Grid to sort of address some of that reliability issues. Obviously, the power outage that led to this meeting being delayed is evidence of that. And then one of the things that we're starting to dive into is a more detailed assessment of waterside infrastructure in each of the different sort of sub areas of the harbor to understand what's needed, what's the financial resources needed to support that effort, so that we can think about the economic strategy in the context of infrastructure needs. Next slide. Another really critical thing that certainly was present in the last harbor planning process, but because has become more urgent and also sort of better understood, is what the flood risks are at the for the harbor and for the areas around it, and what that means in terms of the operations of the businesses that are at the water's edge, and also sort of resiliency for the economic system as a whole. So. Right here, you can see some of the sort of critical infrastructure highlighted. I'll sort of, spend a little bit more time talking about that in just a few slides, but you can see here, this is showing the 100-year flood zone. So this is any given year, there's kind of a chance of this flooding occurring. And this, you can see it sort of mirrors the topography. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's familiar with Gloucester that these are some of the areas that do flood. Next slide. But one of the things that really makes it all the more urgent is that it's getting worse. Over time, that flooding is becoming more frequent. And in particular, because of Gloucester's topography, the depths are increasing over time. So it's not necessarily going significantly further inland, but the depths of that water, of those floods are growing. They will grow over time. And the frequency of that flooding will increase. And so what that means is just, increased risk of damage, increased interruptions to operations, and sort of a more urgent need for a lot of businesses and the infrastructure to adapt. Next slide. And finally, one of the sort of two things that we really wanted to highlight in terms of the infrastructure vulnerabilities to flood is the water pollution control facility, which is actually outside of our study area, but of course impacts the whole area. It's already in a flood zone, but like I mentioned, as the depths increase, as the frequency increases, additional measures may be needed. And then the other aspect is the harbor access roads, which you sort of go in and out of the sort of flood zone, as you can see here. And so there may be needs to, give some attention to the elevations, to any sort of individual mitigation to sort of reduce the overall time and sort of duration that those harbor access roads are sort of out of commission. Next slide. And then, putting for a moment the sort of infrastructure and resiliency analysis aside, looking more holistically at things like, not only the infrastructure condition and resiliency, but also things like parcel size, ownership, regulatory environment, economic activity types, so land use types, the different types of sort of uses along the waterfront, as well as things like circulation and public access. We've started to think of the harbor in terms of different sub areas that share some common issues or common priorities, potentially share some common character in terms of the types of parcels, the types of development that can occur there. So this is by no means intended as a dictation of what will happen in each of these areas, but as a way for us to create a more fine-grained sort of contextual analysis of what the economic opportunity, infrastructural needs, and resiliency adaptation needs are for different parts of the harbor. So as we move forward, we're planning to use this as a way of sort of grounding our analysis in something that's more site specific and not just sort of generalizing across the entire harbor for everything. Next slide. And sort of building on that as like a framework for the analysis going forward, we wanted to share with you kind of the progression that we're going to be moving through as we start to sort of work with the public, work with stakeholders to come up with strategies. So the stage that we're at now is really the foundational trends and influences. So we're looking at things like the infrastructure and flood risk that I've shared with you now. We're also, as Matthew mentioned, we've done with our economic development subconsultant, we've done extensive economic analysis to understand sort of the baseline of where we're at now, what some of the opportunities might be. That's kind of at a general level. Those are all kind of across the entire harbor, in some cases at a regional level. And then we're going to be kind of filtering that through some of the observations and questions. And that's kind of where we're starting to emerge to now, which is asking some questions based on what we've observed, based on some of the patterns that we're finding in the data and in the engagement that we've been doing, and using that to ask questions about these 5 different sub areas that showed in the previous slide to help us understand site specific economic opportunities and some of the strategies that might get us there. And then perhaps most importantly for everybody to understand from this meeting, there's sort of 2 end products in terms of implementation. So it's not just a regulatory plan that's needed to achieve some of these goals. So we anticipate that a sort of a component of the work will be identifying economic development programs that may be able to support implementation that goes beyond sort of the regulatory framework that sort of opens up opportunities, but cannot necessarily implement those opportunities fully. So just keep in mind that this is sort of, there's a sort of a fork in the road at the end of this process where there will be both regulatory strategies and recommendations, and then also some more programmatic or sort of capital investment initiative recommendations that are sort of, they work together, but they sort of have distinctive qualities to them. Next slide. So with that, again, there's lots more to look at if you want to dive in, but we want to sort of get you oriented to what we want to work with you on tonight, which is really getting to know the harbor through your eyes. So we want to understand from you some of the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities that you see along the harbor, and help us to understand what some of those critical issues and priorities are for each of you. So at this point, I just want to reiterate some of the sort of ground rules that Greg had shared at the outset. So we have a big group tonight, and especially in virtual meetings, it's really important to sort of have that etiquette so that everybody has some space to sort of share what they have to bring to the group. So we're going to ask that everybody stays muted in the breakout groups until you've been acknowledged by the facilitator. We have a sort of a crew of people that will be moderating the discussion. So we'll be very attentive to that, but that just helps to sort of avoid interruption and sort of, give people room to speak. We'll also ask that you raise your hand. So you'll see at the bottom of your panel, you can raise your hand using sort of an icon that sort of lets us know that you're waiting to speak. Additionally, we ask that you are all succinct with your comments, that you try and keep them at 2 minutes or less, so that again, there's room for other people to contribute. We want to hear from as many people as we can. We're also going to have a sort of general approach that once you've spoken once, you've had sort of a 2 minutes to share what you have on your minds, that we won't be circling back to call on you again until everybody else who's requested to speak has been recognized and has had the opportunity to speak, again, out of respect for everybody's time. And then finally, if there's anything else that you want to share, please feel free to use the chat. We'll be recording the chat, downloading it after the meeting, and it'll be part of what we sort of consider moving forward. That feedback is not going to get lost. It's going to be very much part of the process. So that's kind of an outlet if you feel like you have more to say, but you've already said your sort of 2 minutes and other people have filled the remainder of the space. So with that, we're going to jump into the breakout groups. And we'll kind of wrap up with a discussion of just bigger picture priorities that go beyond sort of site-specific ideas and opportunities.
So I believe we have, looks like about 25 minutes to sort of report back. Does that sound about right?
Matt, I'm sorry, you're missing the timing. I'm not sure what the timer you're looking at.
Okay.
We have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. I'm happy to just jump right in and speed start what the hot topics were in our group. A lot of interest in what's happening in Harbor Cove specifically, both underutilized parcels as well as publicly owned parcels, particular interest in possible creative uses of IC42. Also a lot of comments about really trying to enhance the traditional marine industrial uses, not just for themselves, and but also as a kind of way to leverage additional tourism. A lot of people felt like the marine industrial uses themselves are really a key component of what people come to see and what makes Gloucester unique and is part of its culture. And then generally a lot of interest, again, in using IC42 or other city-owned assets to promote new technologies in the fishing industry, either shipbuilding, research, other things like that.
Matt, you were group number 1.
I don't know what group I was in, but I'm
We
sorry
were
for
group
going
number
out of
2. So group number 1, I believe it's
Group number
Taskina
one?
and someone from whoever her harbor plan.
Yeah, I think that was us. So I provided a summary to the group, which I hope I can recall. I actually recorded myself, so I'll make sure that it's in the notes. But we had, again, we went through the exercise of identifying strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. That was kind of slow in our group. And I think it kind of warmed up towards the end. We definitely, similar to what Matt had reported out, we kind of had an overarching, if you're talking about prioritization, there was a lot of discussion about how anything that we do, anything that we plan for really has to first and foremost take into consideration climate change. We know these areas are impacted now, and it's not getting any better. So whatever discussion you have about new uses or expansion of traditional uses, it all has to be in that context and lens. But we also had, two very, different opinions about maybe what the future of the harbor should look like. One that's really based on the question around what is the current status of the traditional industries? What's the projection for them? Because you might plan in a very different way depending upon what the future of the industry looks like. And layering in new uses. In particular, the city-owned site. It's not a secret. There are some folks that would like to see alternate uses of that, but also think that there could be some alternate uses that could also be very supportive of the harbor as a whole. And Katie, you can jump in if I've missed anything else. I think that was the broad stroke.
Yeah, I think you generally got it, that, this desire to identify opportunities in our traditional industries, taking care, the importance of enhancing our fisheries and seafood industry, and then what other uses do make sense, what innovation could enhance our community, not just now, but into the future. How does that translate to jobs? How does that translate to living wage jobs so that people who live here and families are here can continue to live here and their kids can, and other generations. Then, how do we balance our working waterfront with tourism and the arts? Chris, we were talking Gloucester Stage there, and they're right on the water, and how do they continue to make good business decisions with climate change, et cetera. And then there was one more point, to not forget to look to other communities. Someone brought up, Portland to the north, they felt they're doing a really good job. How do we take heed of and consider lessons learned in other communities who have been through these same processes?
Mr. Chairman, if you want me to run through the group list, I'd be happy to.
So we've heard from Matt, who doesn't know what team he was on, and then we heard from Greg, who was group number 2. Who's number 3?
That would be
think that's-
Tom Bell,
Yeah, Tom, you ready to go?
Tom and Zoe.
Floor is yours. Just need to. there we go.
Yeah, we had a good conversation that sort of built up steam over the course of the half hour or whatever. And a lot of the conversation, I think, was obviously around the balance of a changing area, both climate-wise and some tension with tourism. So the areas that were identified as sort of priorities, or that we ended up talking more about, certainly resiliency concerns about rising tides and adapting and mitigating to those, and who would pay for those, given the fact that much of the harbor is private property owners. There was some good discussion in terms of the sort of this balance issue that we all want to try to get right, and we're at the beginning of the process of the importance of the alignment with the Municipal Harbor Plan and DPA Master Plan and the local rapid recovery plan that's emerged, that somewhat covers similar areas. And the thought was shared that that really Rogers Street is critical to the marine dependent uses in the fishing community, and needs to be respected and viewed that way, rather than as a gateway for the tourism industry or whatever. So it's just sharing that there's a tension there that we will need to address going forward, certainly. And understanding, exactly, the line of the DPA and the zoning and regulatory issues associated with the DPA. A focus on, I think, generally shared opinion that the blue economy and marine technology and GMGI was good and something that should be strengthened and developed further, in addition to preserving and enhancing the traditional fishing and lobstering fleets. And we sort of ended on a note that really, I think the loudest voices, was this importance of that this is a DPA, and the importance of maintaining it as an industrial and commercial fishing port, and a marine industrial park. That was a highest priority, especially with respect to the development of a municipal harbor plan. So as I said, it was a good conversation, very civil, but clearly there are issues of balance that we all want to get right, but that are hard to figure out at this point. Anything, Zoe, you wanted to add that I didn't quite touch on?
No, I think that covered it nicely. I think that was sort of the focal point of our conversation. I think there's some finer points that we can capture later, but I know we have a limited time left. So let's have the next group go ahead.
So I think we were group number 4 with Jason. So some of the topics were, lighting around the commercial harbor front, which is sort of part and parcel to what happens when you work at night. We tended to be a little bit I4C2 centric in our comments, and not a lot of support of the idea of that type of use. It wasn't the intention to thumbs up or thumbs down the idea, but the idea of maintaining some marine industrial focus in that space was a big deal. Renewable energy came up. We've got a lot of flat roofs. The use, and we've talked about this before on the freezer buildings. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of linear feet of potential dockage in front of pile supported freezers on the harbor front. And I don't know, in the last 2 harbor planning exercises that I've been involved in, that we've really addressed that topic. Recreational boats, around the building center, they seem to have more. We had somebody weigh in on the mixed use on Rogers Street, and the supporting uses of other businesses relative to the idea of a Gloucester Forum. So, and we tried to sort of expand that discussion, right? We were, like I said, we were sort of Harbor Cove specific, and we had the whole harbor to talk about. We weren't group 4 that spoke about Harbor Cove, but we had reasonable discussion about it. And I think it's at least a good starting point from my perspective. I don't know, Jason, if you have a different interpretation of our contributions.
No, I think you gave a really nice summary, and I think our group, we bounced around the harbor to try and reflect some of the comments that we were seeing populating my social pinpoint, and got those captured too. So I think it was good discussion. I think you did a good job summarizing. Thank you. And thanks to the group.
Yeah. Who's up? We had a group 5.
John McCarthy.
Group 5. The first exercise on strength, weakness, and opportunity went pretty well as far as people locating areas of strength, weakness, and opportunity. There was not a lot of discussion on that. There was some that involved the I4C2 project parcel and building that up to support tourism in Rogers Street. There was, in later discussions, people that wanted that left for green space and open space. People were concerned with the lack of open space and green space along the water, the lack of opportunity for people to get to the water. The second part of the exercise went a little better. There were a lot of people that spoke. Gentleman went around the room and asked everybody in the whole group if they wanted to speak. There was a lot of emphasis on the DPA and how it should be strictly enforced with water-dependent businesses. There was talk of investment in younger fishermen with newer ideas, aquaculture, The Deepwater Port was brought up, and how Gloucester is a deep water port and can facilitate larger vessels than many of our neighbors, and that we should be attracting or finding ways to attract compatible vessels and businesses to take use of the deep water port. I don't think there was anybody that didn't mention the rising tide and the sea level rise, which is a major concern for everybody these days. Just looking at my notes to see if I missed anything. There was people brought up traffic and larger employers on the waterfront, and how we should be thinking more for 12-month-a-year type businesses as opposed to businesses that are going to clog up our streets with traffic. I thought it was a good discussion. There were points on to and for certain issues and against certain issues. I think it's good data that we can take back to the Harbor Plan Committee and look at, and we encouraged everybody in our group to stay following the city website and continue with any of their ideas to forward along to the city website, or in any means they want to forward them to the city. Gemma, do you think I missed anything?
I think you pretty much covered it. I also just am going to put a link to the Harbor Plan website in the chat. So if you'd like to take a look there.
And just to reassure everybody that the chat, the thread apparently covers all breakout rooms. Is that right, Gemma? I see a nod from Jill.
I think so, yeah.
Right. So so I guess we're going to just nominate one person to download that chat thread. So that I think that's going to be you, Gemma. Thank you, ma'am.
Very briefly, as an insurance policy, if somebody from each of the breakout groups can save the chat from your personal, that'll just give us a belt and suspenders approach so that we can make sure that we capture it.
All right, Zoe, you stole my belt and suspenders comment.
Sorry.
Any other things to wrap up? I think we're in. I don't know who's in charge, Matt, if you want to take a swing at closing comments, or Craig.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it, because you also have to close your meeting at some point. I guess, some of the other feedback, which would be helpful to us, is also how you think this went. This was the first time we kind of tried this from the city's perspective. Again, hopefully we're not going to have to be doing this forever. But it seemed like we certainly had enough time in the groups. We did have, another maybe 30 or 40 folks that were registered. So I think maybe that may have been more of a challenge. But I would also like just some feedback, as we are engaging in a lot of other ways and a lot of other efforts in the near future, how you think this went in general. Again, we'll be summarizing the note taking from the groups as well. I've also received some inquiries about what if I want to send something to the Harbor Plan Committee for them to consider. Again, use the website that's been set up, or you can directly send things to me. We will be setting up, again, we have this website available. We will have kind of an archive of the comments that we receive, and also all the notes from the meetings and the breakout groups as well. So again, this is the very beginning. I'm really pleased that we had so many people register and be interested in this. It's clearly the biggest issue for Gloucester. It always has and always will be as we approach our 400th anniversary. And so again, there's going to be several meetings over the course of the winter into the spring. And please stay engaged in the process. And I hope you feel like you were heard this evening, because I definitely feel like everybody kind of extended beyond just broad prioritization. And also we heard some of the individual comments as well. So if there isn't anything further, I guess we could have a motion from one of the Harbor Plan Committee members to adjourn.
Mr. McCarthy.
So moved.
We have a motion. We need a second.
Second,
Thank you,
Okay,
Tom.
I'll
Roll
A
call.
roll
vote.
call vote. Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member Balfe,
yes.
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Catone,
I don't know if we lost Al.
Member McCarthy,
Yes.
and Member Cowell.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again and go have some dinner.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ed.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Tessa.